to be putting on Britain's first dance musical. The British had never had that kind of temerity. That isn't what we did, that's what Broadway did.
It was magical to be part of this show, which was different and fresh and unusual.
So on top of doing all the choreography, coping with this blinking jumper and the hat, I had to keep hoiking my mic up and shoving it back in the trousers.
I was totally sure that this was something unique. It felt different to any musical that I'd seen.
What we were doing was we were being audacious, and that's why the original cast was so extraordinary, from every walk of life.
In 1981, a new show opened in London. It was to change the face of musical theatre around the world. It did what no British musical had ever done before. It was risky, it was groundbreaking, and it very nearly didn't happen at all. I'm Ben Thompson, and this is the story of how a show, based on poems by T.S. Eliot, became the West End's hottest ticket. Over the next 2 hours, from here, on the stage where it all began, I'll meet the people who were there. The cast, the crew, and the musicians, who all brought Andrew Lloyd Webber's dream to life. This is the story of Cats.
Well, hi, it's Andrew Lloyd Webber, sitting on the stage of the now Gillian Lynne Theatre, aptly named after the choreographer of Cats.
Hello, I'm Cameron McIntosh. I was the original producer of Cats.
How did you come up with the idea of Cats?
It was quite simple, actually, because it was a book I knew because my mother used to read it to me when I was a child, and I was always very fond of the poems. I always thought they were very clever, very witty, and of course I love cats and have had cats all my life. And I started to set them to music to see whether I could set verse to music. Up to that time I worked with Tim Rice, and we've written 3 shows that have been very successful together. But although we had worked on the plot and the storyline together, I would always come up with the music first, and Tim would then do the lyrics. And I really started to work on the poems just to see if I could set existing verse, and that's how they began. Originally, I thought of Cats as the opening piece to an evening that would include my Paganini Variations, and my Variations album had been quite a big hit in Britain, and there were a lot of people who wanted to do it as a dance show, and it did become that. It became the second part of Song and Dance. Eventually what happened was I had a lunch with Cameron McIntosh, who I didn't know until I had that lunch, and we got on really rather well, and in the course of the lunch, as it got longer and longer and longer, and it was our first meeting, I said I'd got this probably crazy idea about doing a musical based on Opossum's Book of Practical Cats.
I remember I got a little note just after Christmas, almost 40 years ago, and he said, let's meet and have lunch at the Samuel Club. And, you know, we discovered, A, we got on like a house on fire, and B, we thought the same thing about theatre. And he said, why don't you come back to my place and I'd like to play you a few things. And at that point, that's when the first germs of Cats came about.
But discussions had to include T.S. Eliot's widow.
Valerie, I got to know, she became a great friend eventually, but she was, at first meeting, quite a forbidding woman, you know, and she was custodian to all things T.S. Eliot. And we had this conversation which kicked off with her saying, you realise, don't you, that Tom turned down Disney? And I thought, this is not going to go very well, because, I mean, I'm talking about the possibility of a show that could be a dance musical. She probably wouldn't like this. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, Tom hated Fantasia. So I thought I'd better shut up, because I'm afraid I loved Fantasia, and I remember seeing that when I was a kid and thinking, so I thought things are not going well. And then Valerie said to me, but the real reason is not only did he dislike Fantasia, but having seen other Disney films, he would turn them into pussycats. So I said, so you mean he thought of them as sort of quite earthy street cats? And she said, yeah, I mean, they're cats, they're proper cats, they're people, they're not pussycats at all. So I thought, well, I'm going to pluck up my courage here. And I said, well, have you ever seen a group on television called Hot Gossip? And she said, oh, you mean that raunchy lot? And I said, yeah, they're the ones who Mary Whitehouse doesn't like, because probably a lot of your younger listeners won't remember who Hot Gossip were. But in fact, it was Arlene Phillips's troupe who were doing modern dance on TV, and though it was a bit naughty, it wasn't anything that one hadn't seen in America. But anyway, I said to Valerie, well, I mean, I think you're going that direction. She said, well, Tom would have liked that, she said. So I thought, well, now this is getting interesting. And so we started to talk about it, and she got quite expansive about what poems we could perhaps use.
So we thought, well, let's see, I wonder if there'd be a double bill that we could take to a ballet company or something like that, and with variations of the first half, and then Practical Cats, as it was then, could be the second half. We spoke to various people, and certainly from my point of view, the reaction I got was that no interest at all in the Eliot, but maybe the variations would be a really good thing to do in a triple bill. So I reported back to Andrew a few weeks later, and he went, I've had no bites either. He said, look, I have my festival at Sydmonton. I just think we'll get a bunch of 8 mates to come down. We'll just have our group of musicians, and we'll just see what happens. We'll put them on stalls.
My name is Rod Argent. I played the first piano chair for the first 5 weeks, and of course for the whole rehearsal period. We did a version of Cats at Andrew's festival at Sydmonton. It was a very close way of working with him, and we sort of worked on it together, really, and developed it. So we very much felt we were within the development of the first musical aspect of Cats. And he said, do you know what? He said, I would like to move the whole musical thing into almost a new era. He said, I'd like to transfer the technology of recording studios and the state of the art in that sort of scene to the theatre, if I could.
Andrew had regularly, with variations and other projects, he had a group of 7 musicians that he worked the orchestrations with, because he's a co-orchestrator. He knew that he needed special sounds that didn't exist to make the Cat score be otherworldly. And so Andrew cleared the dining room, and we turned it into a studio and built up the score layer by layer by layer, and creating the meow sounds and all of that. It was an amazing time in my life watching him do this.
It was that collaboration that meant that we actually gave quite a lot to those original parts, but always exactly towards the direction of what Andrew wanted. There was a dum da dum da dum da dee 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 dee. That particular theme. We worked on the sound of that together.
How would you describe the music to someone who's never heard it before?
In the end, it was very melodic, as Andrew's music always is, in the sense of he has a very elegant way of constructing melody, in my opinion, and it can sound fairly simple, but it really is very, very important. And it's really quite refined as well.
The score was there. Andrew had a completely over clear arc of where it would go to. If it wasn't for the genius of T.S. Eliot's lyrics underpinning and giving Andrew the reason to write the music in the first place, the show would never have succeeded. It was that oddball chemistry. But that's the truth of any great original musical. And Andrew's wild ability to be so eclectic and pick on a subject, that only he would be inspired to write music. He was the right person to meet T.S. Eliot.
The rum-tum-tugger is a curious cat. If you offer me pheasant, I'd rather have grouse.
My name is Paul Nicholas, and I played the rum-tum-tugger in the original production of Cats.
Put me in a flat, then I only want a house. If you set me on a mouse, then I only want a rat. If you set me on a rat, then I'd rather chase a mouse.
I've been living in America, and I received a call on my return around 1980 from Andrew Lloyd Webber, saying that he had put a collection of poems by T.S. Eliot together called Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. Have you read it? And I suggest it's on my bedside table just under the Beano.
Fibber.
Which is what I always say. No, so I said, no, I didn't know it. But he said, well, can you pop over? Because I want to do a workshop. And he started playing me these tunes. And I said, yeah, well, that all sounds very good. I'd be very happy to do it. And we indeed went to this little church and we performed Cats. We didn't dance, but we sang the songs for an audience of about 200.
What was interesting is that that Valerie Elliott came to that. That was the first time I met Valerie Elliott. And at the end of it, she was very, very enthused because she said, you've got a marvellous sense of street, Andrew, in the music, and I know that's what Tom would like, and therefore I absolutely endorse this going on.
Valerie Elliott and was very encouraging about the verses and produced one or two other poems that were not in the book, which made me begin to think there was something a little bigger in the whole project.
There's no doing anything about it.
If it's about cats, anyway, it's obviously very physical and sensual. Therefore, it is naturally dance. And, of course, the choreographer I knew best at the time was Gillian Lynne. I just smelt that she would be the right person for this, with her background.
Hello, I'm Peter Land. I am the widower of Dame Gillian Lynne DB. Her first involvement in Cats was while she was putting new numbers into Oklahoma. Cameron Mackintosh suddenly rang her up and said, stop what you're doing, get on a train, go to Newbury. Andrew Lloyd Webber is there, and I've got a book. It's coming through the door now. Please read it on your way. So she got to Newbury. There was Andrew, picked her up from there. They got into a piano studio, and he started playing, and of course, music to Gilly was life, and he plays divinely. He's really almost he's like a choir boy playing a piano. He's angelic. And of course they spoke to each other all the time, all the way through, you know, and what she thought of it and what she would do, and she was dancing around the room and doing all the things, and he was speaking all the time, and you know, all of that stuff going on. These two brilliant people, brilliant, and you know, without any edge, without any care, but actually being moved by what was in front of them. And she said she came away that she was surprised that she actually got the job, because surely he didn't hear what she was talking about.
Well, I mean, I remember meeting with Gilly, who's a bundle of energy, and I do remember playing the score for her in its very embryonic state. I realised that Gilly was one of the very few choreographers who had the vocabulary to do it, because she'd started in the ballet herself, but she'd worked through jazz. She knew the genres and all the various genres that were very much the Eliot world, of course, of his, and she proved to be, in the end, I think, exactly the right person for it. I always thought at the time her work was rather underappreciated on it.
Gillian was instantly inspired, but even with a choreographer on board, they were still missing a key member of that creative team.
My name is Trevor Nunn, and I was privileged to be the director of the musical Cats. I was very excited going to a meeting with Andrew Lloyd Webber. Oh my God, what's it going to be? Is it going to be, let's make a musical of War and Peace? Or and when he said, so I've been setting to music those poems by T.S. Eliot called Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. I thought, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I get pussycats.
Trevor said, I had a marvellous meeting with Langford. Thank you so much for arranging it, he said. But what a shame that he offered me the only bad idea he's ever come up with. It wasn't until October of that year I could sense that Trevor was getting to a position, but still saying, no, I'm not sure it's for me, you know. And by this time, he was certainly intrigued by the idea and everything like that, but, you know, quite rightly, being very careful. Eventually, in October, I remember he looked to me and said, do you know, Cameron, I think I've run out of excuses. And I don't think from a point of let's go, any musical has ever gone on so fast.
So talk to me about casting, because it was a huge challenge, physically a tough show to do.
We wanted people who are wonderfully inventive actors. We wanted people who were thrilling singers, with Andrew getting the score at times to operatic levels and with very, very complex harmonies and so on. And we wanted people who could not impede but totally deliver all of Gilly's choreographic extremes.
Naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just one of your holiday games. You may think at first,
I'm as mad as a hatter when I say that a cat must have three different names.
My name's Wayne Sleep, and I played Quaxo in the first act and Mr. Mistopheles in the second act.
Myra Sands, I was Gumby Cat.
Bonnie Langford, I played Rumple Teaser.
Seeta Indrani, and I played Cassandra.
Of the thought of his name is ineffable. And ineffable. Deep and inscrutable. Singular.
We ranged from such a age range and a type. I mean, I remember on the very first day of rehearsals when we were doing that awful circle where you sit round and you say your name and what part you're playing and all that. And I remember that, Wayne, you said that you were playing Quaxo.
Yes.
And then Brian Blessed was after you and he said, I'm Brian Blessed, I'm Wayne's understudy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's brilliant. Remember that?
So funny. And he's a big man. Well, I tried to rise to the occasion.
But my memory was that Trevor talked so much. I'd never been in a rehearsal situation or any sort of situation. He talked for the whole morning, and I'm pretty sure we had lunch, and then he talked for the whole afternoon.
What did he tell you?
I remember him talking all about the period when T.S. Eliot wrote the poems and what they were all about and the history of it, and the fact that they were letters that he wrote to his godchildren, and he was setting the scene of the whole behaviour of the, Buster Jones and all those sorts of things, and why there were gentlemen's clubs and all this sort of thing.
Yes,
so it
the meaning
set
behind
that up,
placing
and
it.
the meaning behind it.
I was able to do a little bit of a talk with the company about the great T.S. Eliot, and obviously combining that with a talk about Andrew and introducing Gilly. I did explain that we would very frequently be in a situation of working out what we were going to do as we went along. And therefore, I said, we're going to begin with a period of improvisation. And that's what happened over the next 5 days. I mean, getting everyone to make fools of themselves to the point where there were absolutely no barriers to invention, no barriers to just how crazy you felt you might have to become.
Hi, Femi Taylor, and I was fortunate to play the part of Tantamile, the original twin, might I say.
And my name's Donald Waugh, and I played choreographer, the other half of the twin.
Did you know what to expect when you came to those first rehearsals?
Not at all.
We were going into an environment and a space where it was almost like electric, because everyone in that room, you knew that there was something magical. There was like an electricity.
Yeah. But little did we know, Trevor Nunn was studying all of us. It must have been about a week later, he pulled us in individually and he gave us 3 words. And I think mine was maybe mystique, aloof, and something else. Go and work on that, because he'd worked out what kind of personas that we were portraying. And so those 3 words became our stories.
The character you played, so Rumpton Tugger, the rock star, should have strong, raw rock voice, be able to move well, and must have wild sex appeal with a sense of humour.
Oh, I think that's described me perfectly. I couldn't have put it better myself. In fact, I probably wrote that. Yeah. I think the thing was that he wasn't. That particular character didn't need to be quite as balletic, is what I think they're a long way around of saying it.
Oh, well, my name is Brian Blessed, and I was in Cats, of course, in 1981, and I played Old Deuteronomy, and I also played Buster Jones.
Deuteronomy's lived a long time. He's a cat who has lived many lives in succession.
Deuteronomy is, kind of incredibly old, so he's mystical. They played the music, and the Deuteronomy's music is very, very Indian, very and mystical. Good. With Buster Jones, the big fat cat, Buster Jones is not skin and bones. In fact, he's remarkably fat. So he's remarkably fat who goes around the town. He only comes in for one little scene. He passes through, it's like Oscar Wilde almost. He passes through, because they're all moggies on a rubbish heap. I said, what do I do? I can't dance. Deuteronomy's all right, because he goes in and sits down and then just moves around and walks around.
And what did you think of?
Well, I went on the street with a great big cigar, and I'm puffing away, and so forth. I got several roses on my body, threw them to the girls in the audience, and this, that, and the other, and then did a Charleston, with a sweet little Charleston, up and down, and right at the end then stopped and went, toodle pip.
everybody was given an individuality.
Yes.
Yeah.
We weren't like a chorus line. Everybody, I think, was really chuffed that they were their own character, and there were no two costumes the same and no two makeups the same.
Yeah.
Do you remember he set us all projects?
Homework, yes, I remember.
I went to the library at Chiswick Library
you?
and in my lunch hour and used to look up. I wrote
Really?
my project. And months later, some naughty person put on the board, tomorrow we've got a rehearsal and everyone has to bring in their projects. And I actually had mine.
I'm Judy Kramer, and I was the original assistant stage manager on the London production of Cats in 1981. In early rehearsals, they spent a good couple of weeks going through all the words of T.S. Eliot with Trevor Nunn and lying on the floor being cats, and I think we as stage management had to cut out various words like ineffable and put up on the wall because, of course, the whole opening number was them all coming in chanting the words.
That cast, we found, was probably pretty close to being the only people who could have played the roles. And a great deal of Cats was created in the rehearsal room. I mean, it's difficult to explain this, because, I mean, I've never been involved with a show like that before or since. But to such an extent where we were prescribed, really, by the dancers and the people we found, that I was creating and adapting a lot of the music to them. And, of course, I normally used to coming in with the score and saying, that's the score, now we perform it. And it wasn't the case with Cats.
The key piece of casting, which only Trevor Nunn could have pulled off, was casting Judi Dench. And the moment she agreed, all the other people who'd been holding off to finding out when we'll do it.
I had the huge delight of getting Judi Dench back into the Royal Shakespeare Company. We were doing all kinds of work together, including she'd played the leading woman in the musical that we did of Comedy of Errors. So Judy came on board as the Gumby Cat. I remember writing to Andrew and the producers saying, I fear that if what we're embarking on is an anthology, it will lose its audience very quickly. I think that musical theatre must have some kind of narrative. There must be some impulsion that takes us through, and ideally an emotional narrative. So let's try and invent something.
Valerie Elliott produced one or two other poems that were not in the book, and a letter which was very interesting, because the letter included a poem called Pollicle Dogs and Jellicle Cats, and it was clear that Elliott had something bigger in mind, because in the letter in which this poem was included, he talked about all the dogs and cats going up to the Heaviside lair, up past the Russell Hotel, up to the Heaviside lair, and it was all there. And he talked about an event that would take place in which the cats eventually, I mean, it was all the cats and dogs, I think, but they all went to the Heaviside lair. And that event clearly was some kind of dance event, which of course made sense of the poem about the Jellicle Ball.
Cats supposedly have 9 lives. So what if these cats, the word jellicle keeps appearing, what if we say the jellicles are a tribe, and what if they meet once a year, and what if they meet because there's a ceremony, And the ceremony is to choose which cat can have a new life, which can have the next one of their 9 lives. So that seemed to be a way forward. And so a little bit of an order began to derive from that. Then something absolutely astonishing happened.
What really was, I suppose, the turning point was the story of Grisabella the Glamour Cat, which T.S. Eliot wrote for Roald Possum's Book of Practical Cats, but never thought it should be published because he thought it was too sad for children. But with the story of Grisabella, of course, there was a story of a cat who had fallen on hard times and who had once been beautiful, and it immediately set my mind racing.
I remember phoning Andrew and saying, I think our lives have just changed. I think we've got a leading character. I think we've got... Because if there is a character, grizzled beauty, Grisabella, who once was the centre of attention and is now aging and desperate and in some way outside this event, only living at night, if she is so desperately in need, and yet she's in some way rejected by the rest, then if in the end she becomes the chosen one, then we've got a storyline, and it could be hugely emotional.
She haunted many a low resort near the grimy road of Tottenham Court.
I was able to go to Andrew and then to Judy to say, look, Gumby we placed very early on in the proceedings. It's entirely possible for Gumby to disappear and Jude, for you to come back totally unrecognisable as Grisabella. So that was a deal, and Judy jumped at it.
Who would ever suppose that that was Grisabella, the glamour cat?
Cats is the only piece that in my career where I followed the art of what the artist could do. I mean, it was so much, if somebody could do something, let's do it. So Magical Mr. Mistopheles, had a great section to show off Wayne's sleep.
He is quiet and small, he is black, from his ears to the tip of his tail. He can creep through the tiniest crack, he can walk on the narrowest rail.
Gillian Lynne's warm-ups I was exempt from.
Were you?
Yes, because I did my own ballet warm-up.
Oh.
Because I couldn't do her warm-ups.
Her warm-ups were mad, weren't
Yes,
they?
they were.
I just
They were
remember doing...
exceptionally hard.
Did we not do weird things like the lion and the things, and we used to sort of like open our mouths and shove our tongues out really far? And I was 16. That was not cool. It was not cool.
Nobody had to
really
warm up our
bad-tempered.
tongues, dear.
Well, I know. But it was sort of all this. I mean, it was yoga stuff and a lot of
that's
all
yoga.
her strange positions, and then a lot of it very, sort of had very double meanings. When I was 16, I was thinking, oh Lord, I really do not want to be doing this. But yeah, and most people got injured with the warm-ups alone.
She was trying to get people to do something pretty unique, to be like a cat. How do you teach someone to do that? What were her methods?
I think she was very true to a cat. She was very sure about the hands and making sure that they weren't hands. She was also very sure about the posture. She made sure that it was believable on the ground as well as in the air that it was still a cat. And I think she was just a genius in how she approached us, and also how she convinced people. Look, you've got to understand, she was a great director. She wasn't just a choreographer.
So teaching people to dance with a tail was quite a challenge, wasn't it?
Look, I think all of them fell in love with their tail. I always remember Finola Hughes and the beautiful White Cat solo that Gilly did, worked out during the pre-work, and she got that because she came home to lunch with me, and our cat lay on the floor and did this stretch, and Gilly went, I'm just going to go back to work now. She virtually took the entire thing back and taught Finola straight away, straight then, and it remained the same, one of the most pure, beautiful pieces of ballet that was ever done. My wife was one of the most energized people in the world, had energy to burn. She was an inspiration to everybody that she talked to. Why? Because she knew what she was talking about.
Gillian obviously was a huge task mistress, and she was very, very specific about the movements. So even though we came from a background with contemporary ballet, jazz or whatever, it was like learning a new language.
Yes, and sort of without looking like pussycats, but becoming feline. She was incredible because she had actually nailed each. It's very detailed, the choreography.
Incredibly.
And you had to be an athlete.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so tough.
Yeah, yeah.
And because of, she was our age, she was, back then she was like 57, 58, and she said, darlings, if I can do it, you can do it. And she used to just, we used to go, okay, keep up. I mean, she was incredible.
I remember rehearsing, because obviously I played choreographer and then took over Mephistopheles for a while. And so she worked me so hard, I remember being sick. Yeah. And she said to one of the stagehands, go and get a bucket and we'll clean it up, we'll start again.
Yeah.
She was a real task mistress.
Yeah. She was very exact and had done a lot of research and very detailed. Her work was extraordinarily detailed, actually. She spent a lot of time with each of us individually, correcting even down to your fingers.
Yes, the third finger over the third finger in the end.
When we did the choir.
Oh, when we did the choir.
That's right.
She
We
would
had to have
check
the
all our
hands
paws.
the same. Oh.
But that's what makes her, the detail.
Gillian was very particular about everything, and it is choreographed within an inch of its life.
On the stage at what was the New London Theatre, now the Gillian Lynne Theatre, of course, and you found this sort of by accident, is that right?
Well, Trevor Nunn wanted a space that was unconventional, as he felt that it would be inhibited, this show, if it was put into a conventional proscenium theatre, because it would put it into a box, and he was absolutely 101% right. The New London had been turned into a television studio. It had been an absolute catastrophe as a theatre. People just didn't get it. It was designed by Sean Kenny to be both in the round and in the proscenium shape. And I did remember that. I was zapped for This Is Your Life. And I came in here and I remembered about the turntable. So if you look at this, This Is Your Life, with the turntable being the revolving floor that could turn it into the round, I'm glazed over because I'm not down there saying, fine, yeah, lovely, great to meet you, great. Then just looking around this building. Once the thing was over, I said to all the aunts and all the various people who'd been coming there, I said, great, you're going to see you at the party, I've just got something I've got to do. So I ran down the road, got hold of Trevor, because there were no mobile phones or anything like that, and they said, you've got to come here. And so he said, oh, I'll come up in a few minutes. So I did the party and smiled. And then we got up here, and I said to the floor manager, do you know this building? Do you know if the revolve still works? He says, I think it does. So anyway, next day, we came back, and it worked. And we thought, this is it.
When we all went down there, we saw it, and I just said, OK, the only reason to come to this theatre, which was in the arse end of Covent Garden, and nobody went up there, especially after dark. And I said, we can only go in this theatre if what's on the stage you could not see in any other theatre in the West End. And of course, John Napier and Trevor Nunn came up with exactly that.
Hello, I'm John Napier, and I designed the original Cats set and costumes. I work from gut instinct, come from an intuitive artistic place. The fine art background is a bit of a monkey on my shoulder, so I'm not going to be doing what everyone expects theatre designers to do. Well, that's how I thought about it at the time. And one of my things had always been to break the fourth wall and to because I'd been interested in theatre that was immersive.
So we're sitting here in the stalls. Give me a sense of what we would have seen, what we would have experienced sitting right here.
Well, the stage came out to almost as far as where we're sitting now, because the back of the scenery was actually on this revolve. At the start of the show, you were just staring at the back of broken down old cars and trash cans and junk, and it was in your face.
And it was oversized junk.
And it was oversized junk. And I mean, I guess it might have been perplexing, but it wasn't a red curtain in a golden proscenium. It was a space in which a performance was going to happen. And you couldn't work out from sitting in some of these seats that are just beyond the revolve what you were looking at. Big problem, of course, the television people and the owners of the building didn't want us in here at all. And we ended up with a deal, which was brokered by Bernie Delfont, who became Lord Delfont, of course, where I basically had to guarantee the show. And it was a really great sort of Bernie Delfont deal, but it was a terrifying deal when I think back on it, because it was that if the show only ran 3 months, which is what they obviously thought it would be, we wouldn't have any penalty at all. We'd just come in as the theatre, because they figured that they could get back their TV and the conference business, because it wouldn't have been a harm to them. But if the show ran longer than that, and for any period up to 2 years after that, which is probably more likely, I had to pay a couple of £100,000 as a penalty. And of course, nobody could afford it. Cameron didn't have money in those days. I got a second mortgage on my house, and that's how we got in here. And I mean, it was a very hairy moment. I mean, I had to keep it from my young wife, for quite a while.
There's a man over there with a look of surprise, as much as to say, well, now how about that?
Do I actually see with my own very eyes a man who's not heard of a jellicle cat? What's a jellicle cat? What's a jellicle cat?
So, what makes a jellicle cat? Well, one man had the job of transforming actors into cats.
It was very much watching the fantastic Gillian Lynne in rehearsal. And I would go along and just kind of be this sort of lurching in the corner, kind of thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then I noticed several of the performers were wearing the leg warmers, but also had the arm warmers on. And the thing that absolutely struck me about that was got nothing to do with it just being to do with dance, is that it actually gave the proportion of a cat. Because if you look at our hands and our wrists, cats don't tend to have that. It's a sort of more of a tubular shape. And it was just a simple equation from seeing something and looking at it and thinking, actually, that makes them more like a cat than if I put them in a fur costume.
The one thing I wouldn't have done, I wouldn't have stayed a day after seeing the costumes if they were all furry and like cats. No. It would have been ridiculous. You wouldn't have been able to see the line of the leg. And what was great about John Napier is that It was the first time in a lot of dance shows I'd been in where your body was allowed to be totally seen in the line.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Normally when you put on a costume, you can't see off the body anyway. Yeah. And I thought if it's going to be furry and old-fashioned, it would be ridiculous. Yeah. And of course John Napier wasn't having that either.
Most of us started off as kind of neutral, some kind of neutral costume, and as you became your character, once you had your song, you then put something on and were transformed. But it was very monochromatic. The wigs and certainly the makeup was very basic compared to what it's turned into.
Absolutely.
And I think it's because the show's grown.
You had to have a basic costume, so that someone like Skimbleshanks had his basic costume on all the time, but when he became Skimbleshanks and with the train, he had a little waistcoat. And so, well, you know, that's, once you've got people on board, once you've actually dragged them into that place where people can, you know, turn themselves into dogs by using, you know, yogurt cartons and washing up things, you know, you've cracked the puzzle.
I have a Gumby cat in mind. Her name is Jenny Any Dots. Her coat is of the tabby kind, with tiger stripes and leopard spots. All day
my first virtual appearance, apart from the naming of cats and all that sort of thing, and the opening bit, was as the Gumby cat. Yes. And I had to wear a very huge coat.
Well, she was a rounded cat.
I was a very rounded cat, and I was a very hot cat. So my makeup whatever makeup I had on, used to be dripping down because I was just so hot.
Because my name is Jenny.
Jenny Dots, that's right.
That's what makes a Gumby cat. But when the day's hustle and bustle is done, then the Gumby cat's work is but hardly begun. And when all the family's in bed and asleep, she tucks up her skirts to the basement to creep. She is deeply concerned with the ways of the mice.
Their behavior's not good and their manners not nice.
So when she has got them lined up on the matting, she teaches them
music, crocheting and tatting.
I made my hair into two little pigtails, made them into a little
like
thing,
ears.
and little bits coming out.
I remember I had this sort of half wig. It was sort of, yes, I put my hair into two like ears with plaits, and then I had a wig that had hair that came from the front that gave me a sort of a lifted look.
So it looked stripy.
The wigs, I mean, the wigs were the hardest part of it, because the characters were being developed during the course of the rehearsal. I mean, there were the obvious ones like Buster Jones or the Gumby Cat, or, you know, some of the more kind of, you know, descriptive. There were descriptive elements in the poems, but a lot of them didn't have any names. All the Jellicle cats. What's a Jellicle cat? And so I made my own Jellicle cats. I mean, the hours and hours I spent in the stairwell grabbing people just before they were about to go onto stage. No, not just putting their makeup on. I mean, cutting their wigs on the staircase and shaping them and with a spray can. All of which would wash out within the next, week, so it'd have to be done again. That was wonderful because it was improvisational. And then, of course, they had to be remade in a version that would sustain itself for longer periods of time.
Creatively, at least, the show seemed to be coming together. But those behind the scenes were facing some pretty serious challenges.
Whilst the artistry side of it was creeping together, I was striding out, trying to raise the money. I mean, Andrew and I, our agreement was that we would try and raise the money half and half. But, Andrew was already a worldwide international success at that moment with Evita and Superstar and Joseph, and whereas I was at best up and coming, and Andrew was taking a risk And I had to be honest with him, and he knew anyway, that I could not guarantee to raise money. I didn't have it. You know, I still had my debts. So I used my best endeavours. But it was so interesting. We both had equal difficulty trying to raise the money from the normal sources.
They said, you got the gift of the gab, Brian. So I went to the banks, and I said, it's so fantastic. I've just seen dancers get lockjaw and fall off the stage. And I went in this bank. Oh, do come in, big fans, Mr. Bless. I said, oh, that's a fantastic show. T.S. Eliot. I said, well, the greatest writers of all this is going to change the West End, transform it. It's him. And Trevor Nunn. We've got the greatest director in the world. It's nothing kind of visionary. You can be part of this. It's got the greatest choreographer, Gillian Lynne. I just left in hysterics. The most fantastic music. Andrew Lloyd Webber here. Fantastic. His music is so original and amazing. It's part of a miracle. And we've got Cameron McIntosh, the greatest impresario in the world. So I've been watching the most wonderful rehearsals. And it takes you out of your skin. It's so wonderful. We couldn't do a number. And the bank manager said, my goodness me, Mr. Blessed, we admire your enthusiasm. But I put it to you, Cats? T.S. Eliot? I don't think so. And that every bank did that.
Most of my money that I raised, I didn't raise my full 50%, I probably raised about 40% of it or whatever, but came from people who never put money in it. And some people, I mean, I can remember letters from people, and I'm saying they're putting in £5,000, which was a lot of money, and I would say, are you sure? You got to be prepared to lose it. And they went, well, I don't want to lose it, but I believe in you. And I would say, they said, but I can't give you the cheque because I'm taking it out of my post office account and I need 3 months. I said, if it's that locked up, you shouldn't be doing this into a West End musical. And they said, no, I have faith in Trevor Nunn, and I have faith in Andrew Lloyd Webber, and I have faith in you that you will do it. I have no idea to this day why so many people who had no track record at all suddenly thought that this was something to do. So it had hundreds, literally hundreds of investors.
At the time, I didn't have a huge amount of money, but I scraped together. I said, look, I'd like to buy a unit in this, and I actually invested in it to the extent of one unit, which at the time, this is many years ago, was just about 750 quid, I think. That repaid me about 50 times, I think, over the years. So, I really wished I'd invested more in it, but I didn't. But I loved it.
If we'd not raised enough money, Andrew would have had to underwrite it. And in fact, there was a point where he had to personally put in an extra £50,000, which was a lot of money.
With the cast and crew working flat out, everything seemed to be falling into place. But there was to be one other big problem that no one saw coming.
I was very much present when poor Dame Judi Dench's accident occurred. She was in rehearsals. We were rehearsing in Chiswick, and suddenly she yelped with pain.
There was a sort of strange snapping noise that some people heard, and somebody said, oh no, Achilles. I didn't know what they were talking about.
She couldn't move her leg, and we didn't know what had happened, but in fact she had snapped her Achilles tendon, which is incredibly painful, and I was the person that drove her to the A&E. And when I think back now, I wouldn't know how to find the A&E, but anyway, she was put in the back, laid in the back of my car, which was some old Vauxhall or something, and off we went to the hospital, because I think they all thought it would be quicker if I drove her than calling an ambulance. And I just remember her being in the back of the car and being the sweetest, as she always is and always has been. And there was this terrible traffic jam, and me swearing like mad, going, I can't believe, get out of the way. And Judy lying in the back in terrible pain going, the poor man, talking about the guy holding up the traffic.
Andrew and I went to see her, and she said, look, she was awfully sorry, blah, 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 and, she said all the things you would expect someone of her generosity spirit, saying, look, please recast me or whatever, and we went, absolutely not. We will wait for you.
But things are about to get even more complicated. Join me after the news. Welcome back to First Cast and the story of the musical Cats. I'm Ben Thompson, and we've reunited the members of the original cast, crew and production team to share their stories and memories of that original production in 1981.
You ought to ask Mr. Mistopheles, the original Conjuring Cat. The greatest magicians have something to learn from Mr. Mistopheles' conjuring turn. And we all say, oh, well, I never...
We thought that the first single from the show was going to be Magical Mr. Mistopheles. We thought that was going to be the one.
Oh, well, I never was there ever a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistopheles.
In order to promote the show before it opened, Andrew recorded me singing Mr. Mistopheles, which he felt at that time was a good promotional song for the show. So he would go on to a TV show and I would go on and sing Magical Mr. Mistopheles, not just as a cat, I may say. But I always thought, yeah, this is a good song. This is a good song in terms of the show, but I never thought it was the song.
We had memory fairly well, certainly we had memory before we went into rehearsal. Mm-hmm. And it was clear, because with the story of Grisabella, that we did need something for her to actually really, I guess, cement the evening emotionally.
When Andrew first provided memory, the actual melody line was totally scored, absolutely there, completely, and the chord sequence was absolutely there, and it was really up to us to just play it with the correct expression. Say it was in C, he would put D minor, G, and then we would construct something absolutely in sympathy with the way the melody and the chords were portrayed, and he would be listening to it and saying, no, that's too florid, can you simplify that, or whatever, and we would get to the result. But he was working with musicians that he really liked by that time, and he was working with musicians that had come to understand to some extent what he wanted, and so we would naturally play in that way.
I played the melody of Memory, which I'd actually written for something else, which never happened. I remember playing it to Trevor Nunn after in one of our auditions.
I said to everybody, remember the date, remember the time. We have just heard a melody that is going to go around the world. It's sensational, Andrew. It's wonderful. It's a hit. So all we have to do now is to get the words to it. In desperation, that weekend, I went home, I sat down, yet again I read Eliot's collected poems from beginning to end, just noting all of his favourite subjects and language and so on. And then at the end of that, over a 2.5 hour period, I wrote a lyric called Memory. And wonderfully for us, Valerie accepted it. It was sufficiently Eliotish for it to pass muster. Midnight, not a sound from the pavement. Has the moon lost her memory? She's smiling alone.
In the lamplight,
The withered leaves collect at my feet. And the wind begins to moan. And so therefore the next word, the only thing that she could cling to, memory.
All alone in the moonlight, I can smile at the old days. I was beautiful then. I remember the time I knew what happiness was. Let the memory live again.
Desolate and stressing the absolute aloneness of this creature. One evening, it was about 7:30, 8 o'clock, everybody else had gone, and Judy was brought in a wheelchair, and I was the only person in the auditorium apart from a pianist, and there was just one light on stage, and Judy sang Memory from beginning to end, and it was wonderful. And I thought, we're still in business, we're okay, we can do this.
I mean, I think that song changed a dynamic, but I often wonder what it would have been like with Dame Judy, because she was so wonderful, and she so was kind of Grisabella in the rehearsals, I thought.
But Judi Dench wasn't the only one suffering with an injury.
I remember one day we were doing run-throughs at Her Majesty's Theatre, on the stage of Her Majesty's Theatre. Jeff Shankly, who was playing the Prince Munkerstrap, he'd slipped over and hurt himself a bit, so wasn't a complete dancing mood. And as Andrew and I were coming towards the stage door, I saw Judy coming out of a taxi on a pair of crutches, and coming down the street on another pair of crutches was Jeff Shankly. And I remember turning to Andrew and going, we're putting on Britain's first dance musical.
Cats rehearsals eventually moved into their new home, the New London Theatre, along with a group of new theatre staff.
Hi, I'm Nick Allett. I was the original theatre manager for the reopening of the New London Theatre for Cats in 1981. My first day at the theatre, I turned up. There wasn't really anyone to tell me what to do, because the theatre itself had to be staffed up from the ground up. And what Cameron and Andrew decided to do was replace experience. They said, what we don't want is the traditional growly old lady in the box office behind bars and a sort of besooted theatre manager, rather elderly theatre manager. We want sort of youth and dynamism. Very nice of them to suggest that could be us. But so I put together a very young group of quite inexperienced but very enthusiastic ushers and usherettes and box office staff. And we had to together learn from the ground up.
First day we came onto the stage, it was incredible because it was chaos because everyone was still building it, but it looked like we had entered this sort of
another world.
Yes, another world, and this sort of rubbish tip, demolition site. It was dangerous. It was terrifying. There were people everywhere, but it was incredibly exciting because you had to walk up into it.
And then the cats would come right out of the stage because there were tunnels underneath. Because I sometimes brought my children here, and of course they were running around into the tunnels and things, having a wonderful time.
Well, my entry was down from the flies right at the top, a gantry.
Oh, yeah.
And there was somebody up there who gave me the bit of rope, and I put my foot in a sling sort of thing, held on to it, and they lowered me down.
And that was it. No health and safety. No health and safety at all.
I was the assistant stage manager with Sam Hunter, and we spent a lot of time running around in the dark in this theatre, and I spent a particular amount of time at the back of the Revolve in the car boot, which would open, and then you had hand props to the cats. And I just remember being in the dark an awful lot.
During the rehearsals, there was a lot of concern about whether this show would work, whether the audience would understand it, because many parts of it were pretty revolutionary, weren't they? They were pretty new and untried and untested. Was there nervousness building up to those previews?
Well, to be honest with you, when you're in a show, when you're a performer in a show, first of all, you're very happy to be working. You know, you just look out there and either it's full or it's empty. You do want it to be well reviewed, and you do want it to be a hit for all those reasons. But you don't have the financial investment in the show that a producer would have, because it is very easy to lose money in producing musicals.
Did you have any sense of the chaos, for want of a better word, that was going on behind the scenes? Be that the finances, be that the...
A little bit.
There were rumours, of course.
I do remember Andrew walking in one day with Biddy, his assistant, and he's going, "This is the worst thing I've ever written in my entire life, and I'm going to lose my house on it." And I'm thinking, oh my Lord, what the... Oh, I do remember that.
And what does that do to the company? When you hear that, I mean, it was really make or break.
In dress rehearsals in this building, there were several moments where Cameron and I at one point thought it was so embarrassing that we'd better close it. And we decided that we would tell Trevor that we were going to close it. And it was a Good Friday, and there was nothing much open in London in those days on Good Friday, just Joe Allen's. And we went down there and said, "Trevor, we're closing it." He said, "Well, no, you're not. We're carrying on." And Trevor's quite a persuasive fellow, and so we didn't argue. But Cameron and I did think at times we had a real turkey on our hands.
The producers were already struggling with financial pressures when disaster struck the production.
About 10 minutes into my first day, I got a call from the stage door saying Judi Dench has arrived and she needs some help. And this was to be her first day back for the first day of technical rehearsals on stage.
We were in this theatre, and the stage was approached by shallow ramps in John Napier's design.
I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" She said, "Well, I'm going to try making an entrance up this ramp." And we walked together up the ramp, and about halfway up, she said, "Okay, now let me go, I can do this." And I let her go, and she fell over, off the side of the ramp. It was the most awful moment. And I thought, my God, I'm going to be fired, and it's not even lunchtime. I've dropped one of the great British icons. She burst into tears, I picked her up, I nearly burst into tears, and she went to talk to Trevor Nunn and Andrew.
We knew it's the end, that we can't possibly continue beyond that. It had gone.
How much of a setback for the entire company and the entire crew was Judy's departure?
As you can imagine, it was very, very debilitating and anguishing. Maybe it's not meant to be.
And at that point, all confidence was shattered, and we realised it was just not going to happen. Andrew and I, we sat down, we were going through potential people, and one of us said, "What's Elaine doing?"
My name's Elaine Paige, and I played Grisabella the Glamour Cat.
Now, talk me through when you first got involved with this project.
I was driving home, and I had the car radio on, and I'm just arriving at my house, and I hear the DJ say, "I'm just going to play a fragment of Andrew Lloyd Webber's theme to his new musical Cats." He said, "And then I will play the whole thing after the midnight news." And he played a fragment of this tune, just a tune, no lyrics. And immediately I thought, oh my God, that is the most fantastic tune. And I had just arrived at my house, so I thought, I'm going to jump out of the car, run into the house, tape it on a cassette. That's how old I am. And I was doing all this, and as I was fumbling around for my keys in my bag, looking down, I saw this bedraggled black painfully thin, pathetic cat. Now, I had not long left Evita, I suppose it's about 6 months, I guess, something like that. And my mother had always told me that if a black cat crossed your path, it would bring you good luck. And at this point in my life, I'm thinking, I might be a one-hit wonder. Here comes a black cat. So I'm trying to usher this cat across my legs to bring me luck, which I managed to do eventually. And I opened the door and I ran in and I set the tape up and pressed record and taped the whole of what we now know as Memory, the tune. I'm playing this tune over and over and over in my head, and I thought to myself, I know I'm nothing to do with the show, but tomorrow I'm going to ring Andrew and I'm going to say to him, I'm going to have to convince him, somehow beg him if necessary, to let me record this song, get a lyric to it and let me sing it, because I was just passionate about the melody. It completely and utterly moved me and affected me in some deep way. And the extraordinary thing was I didn't have to do that, because the next morning the phone rang and it was Cameron on the other end of the line saying to me, "Oh, hello Elaine, it's Cameron here." I said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" He said, I wonder if you'd like to come down to the New London Theatre at all today. He said, we've got a bit of a problem down here and wondered if you could help out. And he explained the drama and the sadness of Judi Dench hurting her Achilles and not being able to, perform in the show 5 days on, the first preview. And he said, but it's not a major role, it's not Evita, it's a cameo role. You've only got one song. And I said, oh, it wouldn't be called Memory by any chance, would it? And he said, yeah, that's it. That's the only song, that's the only song you've got. But I said, wow. I thought, well, no trouble here. I think I might go and have that chat. So that's what I did. And I came down here to this theatre. I sat up there, over there, and sat and watched this full dress rehearsal. Lights, costumes, full orchestra, the whole shebang. And I sat there watching all this thinking, what have I let myself in for?
I must wait for the sunrise. I must think of a new life, and I mustn't give in.
Bringing in Elaine enabled Memory to be brought into the show in a completely different way, which of course has now become one of the most famous and iconic songs in musical theatre history. So some good came out of the sadness of that.
Isn't it funny how fate takes
Yeah,
a sort
really
of hold of something,
strange.
and in fact, in this instance, it made it probably much better.
Yes.
Told the story much better.
tell the
I think
story.
it was hard for Elaine to suddenly come into this mad world
Yeah. Yes.
that we'd all been part of.
It's so easy to leave me all alone with my memory of my days in the sun. If you touch me, you'll understand what happiness is. Look, a new
I remember Elaine coming in on her first day, and someone said, go and talk to her, because no one's talking to her. She just needed the cast to reach out and grab. Hard for anyone, for a company that had been drilled so precisely together for such a long time, for someone to step in and replace an already beloved leading lady. But she did a brilliant job. She just got straight in there.
This feeling that I was never quite part of the company, I didn't enjoy that feeling particularly. It's always better to start a project all with everybody and make that journey together. And I regret that I missed that, the evolvement, if you like, of it coming together. I regret that I was not part of that.
Do you remember when she was in the opening part and she looked so completely different? Nobody would ever recognise her at all. And I think she loved that bit because also it kind of broke the ice for her that she could almost be sort of incognito. And then she went off and put all her Grisabella stuff on.
Gillian Lynne, knowing that I had been a dancer and liked to dance, said, "Oh no, I want you in the opening number, darling. You're going to be in the opening number." And I said, "Oh, I don't know," because it was a lot of, movement. And she said, no, you're going to start off as the kitten, as the young cat, as a young cat. So I had this transformation to make on top of everything else. So I started out as the young kitten, and with a very fresh face and a perky little wig and, tight lycra like everybody else. And then I would have to make the transition to the old glamour cat. So I would, change the makeup and, put a beauty spot on, I thought, and darken it all down and had a old grey wig, but still with a bit of glitter in it, a little bow or something to reflect the glamour of the past, and an old moth-eaten coat, and the tail was all moth-eaten and everything. So I did have a transformation in it, which perhaps I don't know that the others did.
It must have been, and also it's very difficult, isn't it, when you're singing a song and that's really all you're singing is this one big number, that it's so exposed. It must have been really nerve-wracking to suddenly not be part of any of the rehearsals, come in to supposedly sort of save this show, and then think, oh my Lord, I've got to deliver.
The pressure was on. I mean, I knew I had to learn the lyric of the song, first off. It became a feat of memory, really, to sing memory. I think the first preview I did sing Tim Rice's lyric, and then after that it wasn't felt that was quite right, so Trevor started saying, well, can you sing that verse of that lyric, and then perhaps put this in here? So every night I was completely muddled. I didn't know whose lyric I was singing. I couldn't remember which verse came when and when. And of course, every actor has kind of a means, sometimes tricks, to try and help you with such things if you're under that kind of pressure. But I couldn't even write anything on the inside of my hand, or anyway, because I was wearing these gloves, these sparkly gloves with great big red nails on, again to reflect the glamour of the past. So all night long I'm waiting to sing this song, and I'm fretting in the dressing room over there thinking, what am I singing tonight? It was a nightmare. This character was the linchpin, really the key to the whole evening, because of these lines from Rhapsody on a Windy Night is the poem. That she is this world-weary, old cat that well past her glamour puss days are well behind her, so to speak, and that, she's sad, she's lonely, she's loveless, the best days of her life are over, and, there's something really rather sad and poignant about her. Regard that woman who hesitates toward you in the light of the door, which opens on her like a grin. You see the border of her dress is torn and stained with sand, and you see the corner of her eye twists like a crooked pin.
Remark the cat who hesitates towards you in the light of the door which opens on her like a grin. You see the border of her coat is torn and stained with sand, and you see the corner of her eye twists like a
Gillian Lynne, bless her, was really integral to me really finding the character. She said to me, what about if you see one of the young kittens, when I came on for my big number for memory. What about if you see one of the little kittens and she's dancing and she's beautiful and youthful and it reminds you of your youth, because that is what the song's about. It's all about reflection of a past, of a glamorous past. And of course, yet there is that anticipation of hope. So what she did was she got one of the young kittens to do these beautiful balletic sort of movements, and I would try and copy the kitten to do the same thing. But, couldn't quite do it, and then she'd have another go, you see, at something else, a rond de jambe I remember doing, I ended up on the stage here in a heap, really, because I kind of went for the big one and collapsed. And that's where the song begins, down with her sitting on the floor. And so it really, that little moment of dance really set up the song completely. It was a very lonely character to play. So it wasn't difficult to play because I was lonely. I was on my own all night long in this building mostly. Because every time I came on, everybody else left, and then when they came back, I left. But it was a fantastic character to play, really, because it was it's one of the great tragic heroines, really, of musical theatre. And Gilly's brilliant idea of trying to show her attempting to regain her youth it really made it even more poignant and haunting than it already is.
When you heard that opening refrain every night, and the stage was yours, the theatre was yours.
I had my own little melody to come on and go off to. Dum, da dum, da dum. So every time the audience heard that, they knew, here she comes, here comes the old girl. No, so, it was my own little theme, and a hush would go around everywhere. You'd feel it, you'd feel the audience as well, the whole atmosphere would change.
I'm lying next to John Chester, usually having a little chat.
Yes, of course.
But, and suddenly Elaine started singing the song. And it was tingles. I mean, she belted it out the first time ever we heard it.
Yeah.
And we couldn't see her. We were hidden with our heads down here. And we were going, what's this angel-like sound coming out? And John Chester, who's a brilliant singer anyway, just said,
midnight, not a sound from the pavement. Has the moon lost her memory? She is smiling alone in the land of light. The withered leaves collect at my feet, and the wind begins to moan. I do feel pretty possessive about it. I do feel like it belongs to me, a bit like, it's my over the rainbow, if you like. That's how I feel about it anyway.
So tell me about that first preview, standing on that stage.
Well, a lot of it wasn't finished on the first preview.
No, actually,
we were creating the show every day.
We were. It was
and it was a new show nearly every
Rehearsing
day.
all day long.
And a new idea would come in, and then they take something out.
And we also had to create things for our own character, the way they would react to that. So we were, and as well as climbing over stuff that was pretty dangerous, and making sure that the assault course that we were on wasn't going to actually kill us in the long run. So there was a lot of stuff that we had to create that we just did quietly, because you couldn't put your hand up and go, how do I do this? Because there wasn't time. People were too busy. There were more important things to get on with. It was technology was being created as well at the time. We have to remember that.
Even the sound.
So the sound, the lighting, David Hersey did the lighting and created all these gobos that were effects that had not been used before. But at that point, we didn't even know we'd get to the first night. And that first preview, I don't know what everyone else must have been thinking, but it was just a case of, well, let's get to the end and see if we get get booed off.
So I said, well, let me put this spanner in the works. I said, at the end of the first half, Trevor, and on comes Grisabella, and they all leave the stage because they're repulsed by her. Who would ever have thought that that was Grisabella, the glamour cat? She doesn't leave the stage because she's lonely. And I don't leave the stage because I am Moses. Nothing frightens Deuteronomy. And she doesn't see me. And then she sings half of memory and the loneliness and the heartbreak and the failure and the disease. And I see her suffering. I said, right, Trevor? Yes, Brian, yes. Trevor, I cannot leave the stage. You do realise the audience will come and sit with me? No, they won't. Yes, they will. And they're bringing lots of children. And of course the children did come. We have the music to start the second half. I said, let them stay with me. And I'll sing the moments of happiness. And then when I finish this some intimate music, I can take them back to their seats. The moments of happiness. We had the experience, but miss the meaning. An approach to the meaning restores the experience in a different form. Beyond any meaning we can assign to happiness. The past experience revived in the meaning is not the experience of one life only, but of many generations.
The first preview was a very interesting one because the first act went very, very well and the second act not so well. The second preview, it was the other way round. The third preview, we knew something was happening.
The reaction was just gobsmacking. They got it. And I think what they got out of it was the fact that it was unique.
Our first preview, total standing ovation, everybody cheering their heads off.
Word of mouth just took off.
Yes.
So we knew we had a hit on their hands by the first night. Yeah. Everybody was already coming to see it, weren't
and
they?
we were getting ovations every night in the previews.
Yes, we were.
I just
that's
remember
who you rely
very
on.
first
Reaction.
preview. We had absolutely no idea what to expect.
No.
And then Trevor came over the tannoy and said, "Dear company, we have a show."
Yes.
We all squealed.
I do remember running round to that tannoy and saying, dear company, we have a show. I do remember that, and I remember hearing cheering coming from the dressing rooms because everyone knew. I mean, yes, it was good to get it confirmed, but everybody knew. Oh my God, I think we're onto something that we hadn't expected.
I knew at the end of the third preview that we had something very, very unusual. Because I'll be absolutely honest, I took my wife out that night and we went down to the old Annabelle's. I remember the doorman saying, "How do we have a supply line of tickets for this show of yours?" And that's when I knew. And it was extraordinary because the word had got around. And I mean, I said to the doorman, "We can't do that sort of thing." But anyway, it was then.
Previews had gone well and spirits were high. Opening night had arrived, but true to form, it didn't go quite according to plan.
No one had any idea how the press were going to receive this because everyone really felt that the future depended on the success of that evening, and far more so now than perhaps these days. How important the press were and that it went well.
We were all hoping for that massive reaction at the end of the show, because in those days, first night was press night. All the press were in.
The night was very, very successful as a show. Everybody was
absolutely firing. Everybody was doing fabulous work. Everybody was doing exactly as Gilly wanted.
And people started running onto the stage and taking bows, somersaulting, dancing, doing individual things that suited their character. And it was slightly steep, the stage at the back. So I ran suddenly on the way through at great speed to the music and went straight up in the air, you know, and landed with a great whack on my back. I had a big padding on my back, bang! And stood up, and all the bank managers who kind of put on a brave face throughout and wouldn't be influenced by the music went, "Oh my God, that's wonderful." Never known anything like it happening. Anyway, I went back to my dressing room, which was just by the stage, fortunately.
That opening, proper opening night, I think, Femi.
Yes.
That's when that electricity.
Yes.
You felt that.
That's
and
true.
that doesn't always happen.
Suddenly, Brian Blessed, as old Deuteronomy, ran on into the middle. What's he doing? What's he doing?
It was at the height of the IRA's activity in London. You know, the Harrods bomb was that year, the Hyde Park bomb was that year. So we'd rehearsed for an evacuation, and the curtain call was happening, and the applause went on and on and on. But I knew I had to stop it and get the theatre and get the audience out. So I thought the best way to do this is probably to get one of the actors to do it. So I grabbed Brian Blessed and said, "Brian, we've got a bomb scare. I want to ask you to ask the audience very gently to leave. Don't say anything at all to alert them or scare them. Just with your authority, ask them to go." And he said, "Right, okay, yes I will. So he went on and he held up his arms, and of course it was a huge cheer. Everyone thought, milking the applause. So he did it again, and the cheer got bigger, and he said, "No, and the cheering got bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally he looked at me, and he whipped off his wig, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have to leave now. We've had a bomb scare." And everything you shouldn't do.
All the usual tensions of an opening night, and all I just remember was Brian Blessed just rushing on, going, "There's a bomb in the building, get out." And as stage management, I'm not sure, I don't think that quite worked with the usual drill. So suddenly, of course, it was chaotic, as still us in the darkness with a lot of dry ice and torches. And it was what's happened. But again, as the stage manager, like, okay, lock the doors, shut the doors, pick the torches up, what do we do? And again, I think probably what was on my mind is, will I have time to get into my dress to get to the party?
But the extraordinary thing was, I was sort of trying to usher people out. People were still trying to buy programmes and ice creams on the way out. And I said, "Please, just go."
We all left, and
in our
costumes. And in fact, I was outside this theatre, and Marty Webb had a very diaphanous gown.
Who'd come to see the show.
And she was very kindly keeping me warm.
I know that Jeff Shankly, his dressing room was on the way down, so we all had to file down the stairs. And he quickly nipped into his dressing room and picked up his coat. And then when he was standing outside, in fact, I think they went over to the pub, didn't they? And then he realised that he'd got his keys in his coat, and so he just drove home. He didn't go to the opening night party. So he drove home in his costume. And then there was a major panic the next day because they couldn't find his costume and wig, and he came in with it.
Luckily, the stage manager, or the door manager here, he didn't pass on the message until the very end of the show. So although they never got to do any of the encores or any of that, I mean, if it had happened before memory, I don't know that we'd be here now. I think everybody thought that was not a great omen. But we were away.
With rave reviews, Cats was now the West End's must-see show. And over the next few months, the company met with some of the world's biggest names and had a bit of fun with them too.
We had every member of the royal family at one stage or another. There was a wonderful occasion when, in about preview 3, Princess Margaret came, and she was obviously, fairly terrifying, particularly for me, who had never been coached in royal protocol. No one had told me that Princess Margaret only drank whiskey. So I had put out, as one would traditionally would, some wine and some champagne. And I said, "Would you like a glass of champagne, ma'am?" And she said, "No, thank you. Do you have any whiskey?" And I went, "Yes, I'm sure we do." And I ran, and of course it was the interval. The bars were packed, there was no one around, all the bar staff going, "I'm busy. And I knew where the liquor store was, but I didn't have a key to it. So I took a fire axe off and smashed the door to grab the only bottle. And when it came out, of course, it wasn't the right brand. She only drank Famous Grouse, so it was Johnny Walker. She took one sip and said, "Thank you very much," and put it down. And then we had the newly married Prince and Princess of Wales, which was a lovely visit. And he said to her at the end of it, he said, "I don't know how they managed to do that." And she said, "I'll show you." And she dropped to the floor and did a perfect split, like that, wearing headdress, hoiking a headdress. I tried to avert my eyes.
Margaret Thatcher sat with me, ate an ice cream. I said, "By the way, Mrs. Thatcher," I said, "everyone's complaining about the price of the tickets here. You know, the VAT is far too heavy. Can you ease up the VAT?" And she said, "Oh, Deuteronomy, you're a very naughty pussycat. You just concentrate on being a lovely pussycat, and I'll concentrate on being Prime Minister."
Everybody was thrilled who turned up was Ginger Rogers. We did have a little dance, which was fantastic.
We'd find out where they. Well, I'd find out where they'd sit, and
This is so true.
And the whole auditorium's in darkness. And I remember, with someone like Ginger Rogers, I went up to her and said,
so
"Where's Fred?" And she'd jump.
In the interval, it went round the dressing room. All right, guess who's in? No,
yeah.
and then we saw Stevie Wonder was in.
Yeah.
And we went, Stevie Wonder's not in. Okay, watch him when we were doing the Jellicoe Ball because it's all music. And then he starts swaying. We went, Stevie Wonder's in. Stevie Wonder's in. He's in the house.
Yeah.
Barbara Streisand came to the theatre. She was thinking about recording Memory, which, of course, would have been a massive break for Andrew. So he rang me and said, "Look, she's coming tonight, but the conditions are very strict."
We were told that she was arriving, but that she wanted to come through the stage door entrance and through the side because she didn't want anyone to know that she was in the auditorium. And I remember her walking past. We all used to wait there to come on. And I remember standing there sort of in the dark, and we saw this woman come past. She had a gold lame turban on. It was like, well, okay, that's just like a Felicia Beacon, isn't it?
And when it came to the interval, I said to Andrew, "Shall I go and collect her, or do you want to?" And he said, "No, you go and get her. I'll open the champagne." And we had trays of canapes, and I said, "Okay, that's terrific." I went to get her, and she was obviously enjoying the show, and we walked in, and I heard this pop as I went through the door, and Andrew had opened the champagne, and the bottle had sort of exploded. And when I came in, his hair was plastered down over his forehead, and he had a tray of canapes, and they were all bobbing around like little boats floating on champagne. And she took one look at him and me, and she said, "Do you have any milk? Can you find milk in a theatre?" I ran off, rather like breaking down the door for the whiskey, and found 15 little packets of UHT milk, tearing the top off these things, trying to get enough for a glassful. So we filled up this glass, half glass, which of course tasted like UHT milk. And again, she took one sip and said, "Oh, thank you very much," and put it down. At which point she announced she had a headache and she wanted to go home. And Memory hadn't even happened at that point. But of course, she had loved the show. She went on, she recorded Memory. It became a huge, huge hit.
I do remember meeting Barbara Streisand many years later, and we discussed it. But she said to me, "I never got that lyric. I never understood what that lyric was about." She didn't understand it. Bette Midler came. Pal, she is now. I didn't know her then, but that was the beginning of our relationship. And she came right backstage and she opened the door and she said, "Oh my God, I want that wig." So that was quite amusing.
I was a huge, huge fan of Bette Midler, who at that time was the goddess. And I took a night off, my first night off in 8 months, and I had a deputy at that point. And I came in the next morning. I said, "David, how was last night?" He said, "Oh, fine, good. Yeah, it was all good." I said, anything exciting? He said, "Well, it's quite interesting. There was a woman in there, and you've got some of her records." I went, "Who?" And he went, "Let me have a look. She signed it, Bette Midler." I said, "What was she like?" And he said, "Oh, she was fun. She was really good fun. And at the end of the show, she said, 'Do you know what? I've got nothing to do this evening. Would you like to come out to dinner?' And I said, 'Do you know what? I'm tired, but thank you very much.' And I said, 'You idiot. You blithering idiot.'" The night I nearly could have gone to dinner with Bette Midler.
I did a jump at the end I wasn't on the stage anymore. The only thing that was keeping me standing up was a woman who held my legs together with hers because I was standing on an arabesque between her legs. I never did that again.
The band was sort of over there and
hidden.
And,
I know where you're going with this.
And it was sort of, there was a bit coming down like that. Anyway, a woman was caught short in the
She
audience.
couldn't find her way to the loo.
She couldn't
She
find her
thought
way
if
to
she
the loo.
went. She thought if she stepped out off her seat and went to the left, there would be a doorway, but there wasn't.
No.
And then she couldn't get back and was sort of trapped. And so she...
let go.
She emptied her...
But it was above the orchestra.
Above the orchestra.
Oh, no.
And
Yeah.
it went into the
trumpet.
no.
Trumpet.
Ralph Eisen.
Yes.
I know that.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, it's
Oh, you
quite
never heard
legendary,
that?
that
No,
story.
never.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mischief, mishaps, and plenty of laughs. But the show did take its toll on the cast.
The show was enormously demanding physically, and the toll on the dancers became clear very, very quickly. And probably, I think, after the first week or two, we never had a performance where we had the full original cast. There was a lot of injury. We had full-time physiotherapists, massage therapists, throat therapists, constantly looking after them like athletes. But it taught me a lesson that the three people who never missed a show were Bonnie Langford, Finola Hughes and Wayne Sleep, and they were the three that you could always find an hour and a half before the show warming up, really, really extensively warming up.
In the summer of 2018, the new London Theatre was renamed the Gillian Lynne Theatre. But sadly, just a few weeks after the renaming, Dame Gillian passed away. To have her name above the door, the first female non-royal to have a theatre in London named after her, how important was that?
She was bemused, actually, by it. I think she was so proud on the day. I was here, and of course I was making sure that she was all right. She was actually rather divine. She was frail and she wasn't speaking very much, but she got into this chair because they held her aloft, these half-naked men, and it came through, and it was just so gorgeous, and there were cats, and there were Phantom of the Opera people all around her. It had really, really taken a lot out of her. I don't think it killed her, but I think if it did, then it was her Heaviside lair.
And when you arrive and you come in this theatre now with her name above the door, what does it mean to you?
Oh, a lot. Oh, I'm proud. I'm proud. I'm very proud of her. I look at it a lot as I go past, and I look up and I just go, there you are, darling. You are such a wonder.
We're back on the stage in the new London Theatre, well, now the Gillian Lynne Theatre, of course.
Yes, bless
What does it feel like to be back here?
It's really rather lovely, really. It's kind of to look out at that wonderful auditorium. Well, it has evoked all these memories, excuse the pun, sorry, but it has, because, I clearly remember watching it from the first time up there, and I would come on from here, and on this side as well, I had to sort of drag myself on, and I remember, the fear that was involved.
It feels quite familiar.
Yeah, it does.
That's all I can say about it.
I mean, it's as if we were rehearsing or something, and here we are.
Standing on this stage here at the theatre where it all began, it's hard to underestimate the impact Cats has had around the world. For me, Memory's one of the first pieces I learned to play on the piano, and it's one of the most recognisable pieces of musical theatre. But did the original cast and crew know then, 38 years ago, quite what impact it could have on their lives?
I guess that all of us, really thought we were doing something very special.
I think Cats was a revolution in every conceivable way.
I still have some of the original drawings that I did. I have them in my house, And sometimes I go past them and I think, wow, I did that.
I was just 16. I had left school on my 16th birthday wondering what I was going to do. But I remember being part of this mad world that was Cats. And one of the things that Trevor said during the rehearsals was that you will all be able to say that you were original cast members of Cats. And at the time, I think we all sniggered because we didn't think he would ever get to the first night. But you know what? He was absolutely right.
One of the great experiences in the theatre, because you're hoodwinked by brilliance. You really are.
I think that Cats is the most wonderful experience and show I've ever been in. But I thought the atmosphere, the theatre, the rubbish heap, it seemed to go beyond the borders of the Heaviside Lair.
Well, Cats for me was the beginning of a new career in the West End. I'd always wanted to be Gene Kelly or Fred Astaire when I was 5. To come out and be given a new start in a new theatrical career was Cats.
Some parents were with me one day, and their little girl was there, and I said, "Are you enjoying it?" And she said, "Yes." And their parents started crying, and I thought, oh, God, I've said the wrong thing. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. They said, oh, no, Mr. Blessed, quite the contrary. That's the first time our child has ever spoken. That was the magic of Cats then. And she came regularly, and her voice got better and better. And I saw her about a year ago, speaking beautifully, and sat with me again, and I sang the moments of happiness to her.
We were a big family. I mean, I was a stage manager and became a producer because I just love everything that works backstage. And Cats, for me, taught me an awful lot about that.
I think being involved in the show at the very, very beginning, as I was, it's very dear to my heart.
I'm really grateful that I could have been a part of something which actually did change musical theatre.
Cats changed my life. It was our first Everest, and you never get over your first Everest. So I've always believed in my entire career that God's the best producer of all. He takes a hand in fate. You know, people say, oh, you're so clever to have done this and clever to have done that. Cleverness has nothing to do with it. Often timing that makes something become exceptional is out of your hands. What you've got to do is have the wit to seize it at the right moment.
Well, I think Cats was a turning point for all of us. Nobody thinks that a musical's going to be around forever when you write it, but that Cats is still being performed, and that, you know, I still find so many young people who are successful now, you know, who said, well, Cats was the thing that got us into theatre or into film. I look at the cast list of the film of Cats, and the reason that Tom Hooper's been able to get that cast list is because so many of them were kids and saw Cats, including Tom Hooper, in this building. Tom says, he was 8 years old, and that's what turned him onto theatre and film. That's what's extraordinary, is it's bred a legacy of people who, I think, had never seen anything quite like it.
These modern productions, they're all very well, but there's nothing to equal from what I hear tell. That moment of mystery when I made history.
Next Friday night, Radio 2 will feature a special programme of Andrew Lloyd Webber's music. Join me with the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra for Friday night is Music Night.